She had everything: money, servants, luxury. But for weeks, the billionaire's daughter refused to eat, refused to speak. Until one day, a poor black maid entered her room and whispered just 4 words that changed everything. What happened next left the entire mansion in tears. Before we begin this heart-touching story, tell us in the comments, from which country are you watching this video? And if you love stories that touch your heart and teach powerful life lessons, make sure to subscribe to our channel and be part of our growing family. The mansion stood high on the hills, vast, beautiful, and lifeless. Its marble floors gleamed under golden chandeliers, yet every corner echoed with silence. The servants walked on tiptoe, whispering as if afraid that sound itself might break something fragile. At the center of this grand house was a room that hadn't heard laughter in weeks, the room of Amelia Whitmore, the only daughter of billionaire Charles Whitmore. Once full of music, giggles, and the soft voice of her mother, it had now become a place of shadows and sorrow. Amelia was only 12, fragile, pale, and heartbreakingly quiet. She hadn't eaten properly in nearly a month. Doctors had come and gone, nutritionists had tried their best, and even world-class psychiatrists had been hired. But nothing worked. She would sit by the window for hours, staring at the gardens below where she and her mother once played. The same gardens her mother had loved before that terrible night. It had been 6 weeks since the car accident took Mrs. Whitmore's life. 6 weeks since Amelia last spoke a word. Her father, Charles, one of the richest men in the country, was helpless. For the first time, money couldn't fix something. Every time he walked past his daughter's room, he paused, wanting to go in but afraid of what he would see. He blamed himself. He had spent years building empires and businesses, but never enough time building moments with his daughter. One evening, he stood in the grand hallway, watching the staff carry away another untouched breakfast tray from Amelia's room. The untouched food, the cold tea, the silence, it was all too much. She didn't even take a sip again? He asked quietly. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dalton, shook her head sadly. She just sits there, sir, looking out the window. She doesn't even look at us anymore. Charles turned away, his jaw tightening. Find someone, he muttered. Anyone who can reach her. I don't care what it costs. The next morning, a new face arrived at the mansion, Grace Daniels, a woman in her mid-30s, dressed simply but neatly. Her eyes held both strength and gentleness, the kind that comes from surviving storms no one talks about. The staff looked at her with quiet curiosity. A maid from the city's poorer side, in this mansion of gold and marble? Mrs. Dalton pulled her aside. Listen, Grace, the girl won't speak. She won't eat. Don't take it personally if she ignores you. Just keep her room clean and stay quiet. Grace smiled softly. Yes, ma'am. I understand. When she entered Amelia's room for the first time, she was struck by the stillness. The curtains were drawn tight, the air heavy. A little girl sat by the window, knees to her chest, her long brown hair falling over her face. Beside her was a small table, with a tray of untouched breakfast. The pancakes had gone cold. Grace didn't speak right away. She simply walked to the window and pulled the curtains slightly open. Soft sunlight spilled into the room, gently touching Amelia's pale face. The girl flinched at the light but didn't look away. Grace began humming, a slow, gentle tune from her childhood. The melody filled the silence like a whisper of warmth. Amelia turned her head slightly, her eyes narrowing, curious. No one had sung in this room since her mother died. Grace smiled at her softly. That song, she said quietly, helped me when I couldn't sleep at night. My mama used to sing it to me when I was scared. No reply. Amelia turned her face away again. Grace continued to hum while tidying up the room, folding the blanket, straightening the books, wiping the table. She didn't force conversation. She simply worked with quiet kindness. After a few minutes, she glanced toward the untouched tray. You know, she said in a gentle voice, back home we used to make pancakes every Sunday. Not as fancy as these, of course, she chuckled softly. Ours were small and a little burnt sometimes, but we still laughed while eating them. No response again. But this time, Amelia's hand twitched slightly, a tiny movement that Grace didn't miss. Later that evening, when the staff gathered downstairs, they expected the new maid to quit like all the others had. But Grace didn't. She didn't eat, Mrs. Dalton asked hopefully. Did she at least say something? Grace shook her head. Not yet. Then, with a knowing smile, she added, but she listened. That night, Charles stood by Amelia's door again. He could hear the faint hum of a song from inside, something new, something warm. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel entirely empty. He closed his eyes, letting a single tear fall before whispering to himself, maybe this time someone can reach her. The next morning, sunlight filled the mansion again. Birds sang in the garden. And in Amelia's room, Grace stood quietly by the window, humming that same soft melody. The little girl, still silent, turned her head, this time not to ignore, but to listen. The silence of the mansion had begun to break. Morning light spilled through the tall glass windows, painting golden lines across Amelia's room. The world outside was alive, birds singing, gardeners trimming roses, fountains whispering softly. But inside, everything was still. Grace entered quietly, balancing a tray with a bowl of warm oatmeal, fresh berries, and a small glass of milk. She paused for a moment at the door, watching Amelia sit by the window, her small body wrapped in a blanket, her face half hidden behind her hair. "Good morning, Miss Amelia," Grace said softly, her voice warm and calm. No reply, not even a glance. Grace smiled anyway and walked in. "It's a beautiful day outside. The roses are blooming again. I think they missed you." She placed the tray on the table and began to tidy up the room, folding the bed sheet, arranging the books, opening the curtains wider. Dust particles danced in the sunlight like tiny golden stars. Amelia didn't move, but her eyes followed Grace quietly, without expression. After a while, Grace sat down on the edge of a chair and began humming that same tune again, the one from yesterday. It was soft, soulful, full of warmth and memory. Finally, Amelia turned slightly, just enough to see Grace's face. Grace smiled faintly. "My mama used to hum this when I was sad. She said the song carries our pain to the sky and turns it into light." She chuckled softly. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's why mornings always feel a little kinder. Amelia didn't respond, but her fingers fidgeted slightly with the corner of her blanket. Grace noticed. She stood up and began talking again, her tone light and friendly. "You know, when I was a little girl, I used to hate oatmeal. I'd hide it under the table when my mama wasn't looking. One day she found out and made me promise to give it a chance. So I told her, only if you draw a smiley face on it. And she did." Grace laughed gently, lifting the bowl from the tray. "Just like this." Using a spoonful of berry jam, she drew a tiny smile on top of the oatmeal. "There," she said proudly. "Oatmeal with a smile. Maybe it tastes better this way." She placed it on the small table near Amelia and walked toward the window. "You don't have to eat it now," she said kindly. "But if you ever feel a little hungry, just remember, it's smiling at you." Grace left the room quietly. An hour later, when she returned to pick up the tray, she froze. The oatmeal bowl was half empty. She smiled softly, not with victory, but with quiet gratitude. It was the first step, a crack in the wall Amelia had built around her heart. The next few days passed gently. Grace never forced conversation. Instead, she shared little pieces of her life, stories that floated like warmth in the cold air. "One time," Grace said one afternoon while dusting the shelves, "I tried to bake a cake for my little girl's birthday. The oven broke halfway and it came out all flat and sad-looking. But she laughed so much she called it our pancake cake." Grace's voice softened. "She said it tasted like love. I never forgot that." Amelia's head lifted slightly. A flicker of something, curiosity maybe, passed through her eyes. Grace caught it and smiled, pretending not to notice too much. The next morning, when Grace brought breakfast, she added a small hand-sewn doll beside the tray, made from leftover cloth, with a red thread smile stitched on its face. Amelia stared at it for a long moment. "You can keep her," Grace said gently. "She doesn't talk much either, but she's a great listener." A faint shadow of a smile curved on Amelia's lips before she turned her face away. But it was there, even if just for a second. That evening, Mrs. Dalton noticed something unusual while checking the room. The little doll Grace had made was lying next to Amelia's pillow, her small hand resting on it. When Grace returned later, she whispered quietly, "Good night, Miss Amelia." And as she turned to leave, she heard a sound, faint, fragile, almost a whisper. "Good night," Grace stopped, her eyes widening. It was barely audible, but it was real. Amelia had spoken her first word in 6 weeks. Grace stepped out of the room, closed the door gently, and pressed a hand to her heart. She didn't cry. She smiled, the kind of smile that carries both pain and peace. Downstairs, the mansion staff noticed the change immediately. There was a different air, softer, warmer, lighter. And when Charles Whitmore returned home that night, he saw it too. For the first time, his daughter's window wasn't shut. Inside the once silent mansion, something had begun to heal. The change was quiet, but it was real. In the days that followed, something gentle began to bloom inside the mansion. Amelia still didn't talk much, but her silence no longer felt cold. It felt thoughtful, like the calm that comes before a sunrise. Grace noticed small things. The untouched trays were now half empty. The curtains stayed open longer. The little hand-sewn doll now had a name, Sunny. Amelia had written it on a small piece of paper and placed it beside her bed. When Grace saw it, her heart melted. "Sunny," she whispered. "That's a beautiful name." Amelia didn't reply, but a faint blush crept onto her cheeks. Every morning, Grace brought breakfast with a little twist, pancakes shaped like hearts, fruits arranged in smiles, syrup patterns that spelled tiny words like hope or smile. Each day's plate told a different story, and each story made Amelia's eyes sparkle just a little more. Sometimes Grace would sit on the floor beside her while folding laundry and talk softly. "I once knew a girl who thought crying made her weak," Grace said one day. But when she finally let her tears out, she said it felt like her heart could breathe again. She looked at Amelia with kind eyes. "Sometimes, sweetheart, it's okay to cry. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're healing." Amelia didn't speak, but her lips trembled, and for a brief moment, Grace saw tears glisten in her eyes. By the second week, laughter, small, hesitant, and precious, began returning to the mansion. One afternoon, Grace brought a box of old crayons and blank sheets of paper. "I thought maybe we could draw something," she said cheerfully. Amelia tilted her head. "I don't draw." "That's okay," Grace smiled. "Neither do I. That's what makes it fun." They sat by the window, sunlight spilling over them. Grace drew a crooked house with smoke coming out of the chimney. Amelia laughed softly. "That doesn't look like a house." Grace gasped playfully. "You're right, it looks like a potato." Both of them giggled, a sound the walls hadn't heard in so long. Soon Amelia took a crayon and began drawing her own picture. A small girl standing under a tree holding someone's hand. Grace leaned closer. "Who's that?" Amelia hesitated. "It's me. And Mama?" Grace felt a lump form in her throat. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Your mother would be so proud." That evening, Charles stood outside the door again, listening. He could hear laughter, his daughter's laughter, for the first time since his wife's death. He leaned against the wall, tears silently falling. Grace's voice drifted through the door. "You see, the best meals aren't always made in the kitchen. Sometimes they're made with love, right here." He heard her tap lightly on her chest. As the days passed, Amelia's health improved. She began walking in the garden again, touching the flowers her mother once grew. Grace would walk beside her, always humming that same gentle tune, the melody that had first broken the silence. One morning, Amelia turned to Grace suddenly and said, "Can you teach me that song?" Grace's eyes widened in surprise. Then she smiled and nodded. Of course. They sang together, their voices blending softly with the breeze. It was imperfect, tender, and full of heart. From her bedroom window, Mrs. Dalton watched them and whispered to another maid, "I don't know what magic that woman has, but it's working." For the first time in months, the mansion didn't feel like a museum of grief. It felt alive again, full of light, warmth, and the quiet sound of healing hearts. Amelia's world, once frozen in pain, was slowly beginning to move again. And at the center of it all stood Grace, the woman who fed her not with food, but with love. It happened on a rainy evening. Thunder rolled across the sky as lightning flickered through the mansion windows. Amelia sat by the fire holding her doll Sunny, waiting for Grace to bring her usual cup of hot cocoa. But that night, Grace didn't come. Hours passed. The rain kept pouring, and Amelia began to worry. Grace never missed their evening together. She peeked into the hallway, empty. The house was quieter than usual. Then she heard hurried footsteps and whispers from downstairs. "She fainted in the kitchen," one of the maids said. "They're taking her to the hospital now." Amelia froze. The mug in her hand slipped and shattered on the floor. Her heart pounded as tears welled up in her eyes. Without thinking, she ran down the staircase barefoot, calling out, "Grace! Grace!" It was the first time she had shouted anyone's name in months. By the time she reached the main door, the ambulance was already gone. She stood there in the rain, crying, her small hands trembling. Her father, Charles, rushed to her side, wrapping his coat around her. "Amelia, sweetheart, come inside." "She'll be fine." But Amelia shook her head, her voice breaking. "She can't leave me." Not her, too. The next morning, Charles took her to the hospital. Grace lay on the bed, pale but peaceful, an IV running through her arm. Amelia climbed onto the chair beside her, clutching her hand. "Wake up," she whispered through tears. "You still have to sing me that song." Grace stirred faintly and opened her eyes. When she saw Amelia's face, she smiled weakly. "Hey there, sunshine," she said softly. "Don't cry. I just got a little tired." Amelia shook her head, sobbing. "You can't go. I need you." Grace brushed a tear from her cheek. "You're stronger than you think, baby girl. You don't need me forever. You just need to remember love never really leaves. It just changes faces." As Charles spoke with the doctor in the hallway, Amelia overheard them quietly. The doctor said, "She's been overworking. She's a former nurse. Used to volunteer in conflict zones years ago. Lost her daughter during an airstrike overseas. She never really recovered." Amelia's eyes widened. "Lost her daughter?" Her heart clenched as the truth hit her like a wave. Grace hadn't just been kind. She had seen in Amelia the reflection of the child she once lost. Every song, every smile, every act of love, it all came from a heart that had once been broken too. Back at the bedside, Amelia whispered, "You had a daughter." "Didn't you?" Grace's eyes softened. "Yes, sweetheart. She looked a lot like you, brave, beautiful, and always trying to be strong." Tears filled her eyes. "When I lost her, I promised that if I ever met another little girl who needed love, I'd give her every bit of what I had left." Amelia leaned forward and hugged her tightly, crying into her shoulder. Grace held her just as tightly, whispering, "You healed me too, Amelia. You reminded me what love feels like again." That night, as they returned home, Amelia didn't say a word during the drive. She just held the little cloth doll close to her heart. And for the first time, she realized that sometimes the people who come into your life aren't there to serve you. They're there to save you. A week later, the sun rose brighter over the Whitmore mansion. The air felt different, lighter, softer, alive again. Grace was finally coming home from the hospital that morning. The staff decorated the living room with fresh flowers, and Charles himself supervised everything. But Amelia had her own secret plan. In the kitchen, the little girl stood on a stool wearing an apron 2 sizes too big. Her hair was tied in a messy bun and flour covered her cheeks. "Sir, maybe you should let the chef," a servant began. No, Charles said gently, watching his daughter. Let her do it. This is her way of saying thank you. Amelia worked carefully, flipping pancakes, cutting fruit, and arranging everything on a small white tray. In the center of the tray, she placed a single plate with syrup spelling one word: love. When Grace entered the mansion, she was greeted by smiles, flowers, and warm hugs, but the greatest welcome came from Amelia. The little girl ran to her, wrapping her arms around her waist. "You came back," she whispered, her voice trembling. Grace smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Of course I did, sunshine. I promised I wouldn't leave you hungry again." Amelia laughed softly. "Then come with me." She led Grace to the dining room, the same room that had been empty and cold for weeks. Now it glowed with sunlight. On the table sat Amelia's tray, her homemade meal. Grace's eyes widened. "You made this?" Amelia nodded proudly. "You used to feed me every day. Today I want to feed you." Grace sat down, overwhelmed. The first bite brought tears to her eyes. It wasn't the taste. It was the love behind it. Amelia placed her hand on hers and said softly, "You fed my heart when no one else could." Charles watched quietly from the doorway, his own heart heavy with gratitude. He realized that all his wealth, all his luxury, could never give what one woman's kindness had brought: healing. That day, laughter filled the house again. Grace and Amelia sang their little song together as they ate, sunlight dancing through the windows. The mansion, once silent, now echoed with life and warmth. As the story closes, the camera pans over the breakfast table, a little girl and a maid sitting side by side, sharing pancakes, laughter, and love. And a voice softly says, "Some people don't feed your stomach. They feed your soul." Which moment touched your heart the most? When Grace fainted, or when Amelia cooked for her? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story made you smile or brought a tear to your eye, please give it a like. It helps us reach more hearts like yours. And then don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heart-touching stories that remind us what humanity truly means.